Well, good morning. I'm excited to be with you both in person and online this morning. We are going to be looking in Mark chapter 5 today, in the later part of Mark chapter 5. So if you would like to go ahead and turn there. And just a heads up, if you have elementary and younger children, Mark chapter 5 talks about a woman who is bleeding. And we're going to be talking about that and using the word blood and those kinds of things. And if that's not comfortable for you and your child, please take advantage of our preschool, our nursery, and our elementary services going on in the lower building. Let's say most of us know two different types of storytellers. Yeah? Let's say we know the people who are straight to the point. When they're gonna tell a story, you're like, okay, good. This story is gonna be easy, it's gonna be chill, they're gonna just tell it like it is. But then there's also those people in your life, your circle of friends, your family, that might tell a story like this guy. Oh, it's only on that screen. Okay, so I'm at the art museum, right, with my cousin Ignacio, right, and he tells all these different details. Did it get up on this one? Yeah. And there was this abstract expressionist exhibit, and you know I'm like more like a neo-cubist, right? That's me, okay? I am the detail-oriented guy. So I'll explain this to you. Picture this, I get home, I'm talking with Morgan, hey, tell me about your day. Hey, tell me about your day. Okay, so I went to the Flying Goat for lunch, and he was wearing a blue shirt, he had a salad, I had a sandwich. We had some really great conversations. We started talking about family dynamics, and it was really great. Morgan does not care that I had a sandwich. Does not care that he was wearing a blue shirt and I was wearing stripes. Those details don't matter. She wants to be like, how was the conversation? Was it beneficial? Yes, it was. Good, story over. But I'm like, no, you need to know. Like, you need to know these details. But let's be honest, sometimes details only add length, not depth. Mark's gospel is short, it's fast-paced, it's to the point. It's like a highlight tape of Jesus and his miracles and his life, but it is not lacking in detail. Much like a cake or an onion, Mark has layers like the rest of the Bible. Mark draws our attention to the power and the authority of Jesus. So we're gonna recap real quick. So far, we have seen his power over disease as he heals people in Mark chapter 1, Mark chapter 2, Mark chapter 3. We see his power over demons in Mark chapter 1 and Mark chapter 5, the first part. And last week with Pastor Dave, we learned about his authority over nature in Mark chapter 4 when he calmed the storm. Today, we're going to look at the later part, starting in verse 29, of more layers. Like my favorite food, lasagna, you can't really pick it apart. You need all the pieces to make a meal. You need both of these stories. Two individuals who could not be more different. A parent desperately trying to save his child, and a woman desperately trying to save herself. But their stories are intertwined. They teach us an important lesson on biblical faith. Well, what kind of faith is that? Glad you asked. Billy Graham had the same question, and he answered it way better than I can, so I'm just gonna let him do it for me. He said, you must believe that God exists and that he loves you so much that he sent Jesus to save you. Second, you must trust wholly in Christ's salvation, put your life into his hands, and believe Jesus not only can save you, but will save you. Biblical faith is trusting God for your entire life. So let's jump in and start unpacking some of these layers, starting in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. It talks about how Jesus has now crossed back over the Sea of Galilee and has found himself a little bit on the eastern shore, most likely heading back into the city of Capernaum. Now, if you've been sticking with us, Pastor Bart has told us that Capernaum is like a hub city for Jesus' ministry. Jesus goes to Capernaum often. They know him. He's a miracle worker. Last year, Morgan and I had the privilege and honor to go to Israel. And some of you are signed up to take that trip in Israel. And I hope Capernaum is on the list. Jesus was there so much that it calls itself, okay, I'm so confused with these screens, but that's okay, we'll roll with it. Boom, the town of Jesus. It was so cool because we got to see first century streets, stand where Jesus stood, and we got to see the pillars and the columns and the ruins of the synagogue in Capernaum. We're gonna look at 3 people today, the first being Jesus, we've already met him, and now here comes our second person, Jairus. Jairus was the leader of that local synagogue. And he comes running, pushing through the crowd, trying to get to Jesus. As always, there's a huge crowd following Jesus because he's back in Capernaum. They know him. This is the miracle worker. Guys, is today a day he's going to perform another miracle? Man, even if he doesn't, like, what is he going to say? What is he going to teach us? We've got to, close up shop, quit our jobs. We've got to follow this guy when he's back in town. And so we meet Jairus. Now, a synagogue is just a local place of worship. We are called Suncrest Family Worship Center, or Suncrest Family Synagogue. It's just a center place of worship. But we're not a synagogue because we're not Jewish, right? So we can't change our name to that. But it is just a local place of worship. Now, Jairus, being a synagogue leader, he would be more administrative, not priestly. He doesn't hold the services or read from the text, do sacrifices. He's not a priest. He just makes sure the priest has everything they need. He supervises the worship services. He takes care of the synagogue. And because of this, his position in town has him in high esteem. He's well respected, has a nice house. He is pretty well off, but no amount of privilege could keep him from experiencing fear and pain when his daughter becomes deathly ill. At that moment, nothing matters. His title, his position, his wealth, the number of servants he has, none of that matters. He just becomes like any other parent who has ever asked Jesus to help their child. The crowds are pressed in around Jesus, but they notice Jairus, and they know Jairus. They know his face. They respect him. So they make a little way, but not like a lot. There's still some elbows bump in and some shoulders, but then he gets to Jesus. And the Bible tells us that he falls at Jesus' feet. And he says, Jesus, my little girl is sick. Please save her. Jesus picks him up off the ground and doesn't say anything. Doesn't say anything. That's a powerful moment right there. He just begins to move. It's incredible what happens when we're desperate. Jairus was desperate, running to Jesus, falling at his feet. They begin to move, but the crowds are still pressed in around them. They're still mosh pit in it. That's a concert term. Like if you go to a concert and you bump around a mosh pit, okay? I went to one time, broke my glasses. It was a great time. Got punched in the face, memories, okay? But it's like that. Like the Gospel of Mark says they are pressed in upon. And so they're all just touching, and so they can't move quick. But she's super sick. They do not have a moment to lose. Jairus is feeling a little bit of hope, a little bit of joy. Jesus has responded. Jesus is walking with him, and then Jesus stops. So let's stop for a second and talk a little bit more about Jairus this morning. Was Jairus a man of great faith or a man of small faith? Could he have came to Jesus and just said, hey, Jesus, just speak a word of healing and it will be done, instead of asking for a house call? Could he have came a little calmer, not so urgent? But remember, he's a father. He's desperate. He's heartbroken for his sick little girl. He's probably out of breath from running and trying to get to Jesus, to get to this last attempt to save her life. And what do we see? Jesus responds to his faith. Whether our prayers are small or giant-sized, Jesus pays attention to faith. He wants to build it. He wants to affirm it always. We are all on a journey of faith, on a spectrum of unfaith to faith. My first point this morning is Jesus responds to faith. We should stop trying to measure our faith against the faith of others and just start using the faith that we have. Jesus meets all of us on the road where weak faith, desperation, and worry turn into trust and confidence. Now, Jesus could have spoken a healing word and said, when you get home, it will be done. Your faith has healed her. You're good to go. He could have said something like the joke, just have her take some aspirin, call me in the morning, right? They didn't have aspirin back then, but stick with me, right? That's a joke because of where medicine was versus where medicine is now today. When doctors couldn't fix you, they would say, ooh, just take some aspirin, get some sleep, call me in the morning, hoping that the body would fix itself on a good night rest. But have you ever thought about aspirin? They're like super tiny, but they're so powerful. They're used for headaches, sore muscles, to reduce fever, lower back pain, and they have been proven to help heart patients. People with heart problems, some of them take aspirin on the daily. It's amazing how something so small can do so much to heal and help us. And Jesus can use even the smallest faith in a big way. We must put our faith into action. So they start moving, and then Jesus stops and he asks, who touched me? Actually, it's probably a little bit more manlier than that, but he was like, who touched me? And his disciples are like, Jesus, we're pressed in upon. Like, we're bumping elbows. Like, that's a ridiculous question. Don't call me ridiculous, just kidding. But he was like, no, this was not a normal touch. Like, somebody touched me and power left my body. So he begins to look around, and then we meet our third person. A woman comes forward and begins to tell Jesus the truth of what's been going on. She had been sick for 12 years with the constant flow of blood. She had been to many doctors, has used all her money, and is not getting any better. In fact, she's getting worse. The Bible tells us she tried all these treatments to no avail. Now, if you've read this story before, or you've heard it before, or maybe today's your first time, maybe somebody out there is wondering, what do you mean by treatments? Like, what were the treatments back in the Bible? Well, I'm glad you asked. So when you look into Jewish documents and rabbinical treatments, there are a couple that I'm going to share with you today, just two. The first one is frightening, literally. Like, her doctor said, hey, listen, your body is out of sync, so we're going to scare you, but not scared, like literal fright. You can't know when it's happening, you can't expect it, or you won't be scared. But we are going to frighten you so bad to death that your body internally will sink back up. Yeah, okay? The other one is they would feed her certain grain passed through certain livestock, mostly mules. They would feed a mule, it would pass through, they would go pick the grain out of the poop and then feed it to her to try to fix her. So think about that. So she had this physical suffering for more than a decade, had to go through those types of treatments. But on top of it, this kind of illness kept her completely shunned and isolated from her community. According to Jewish text, you would not be allowed to be near her, touch her. She couldn't visit her family. She wasn't allowed in the synagogue to worship. When a woman is in their cycle, they are unclean and sent into isolation. Sometimes Jewish texts would even say proximity could lead to death, and her own dirtiness would cancel out the powers of a miracle worker. Jesus was a miracle worker. She had many demoralizing days, failed treatment on top of failed treatment, but she did not give up. How incredible is that? She took a step. She got out of her sickbed. She left her house. She took a step towards Jesus. She decided right there in her house, that was a private defining moment. Just deciding to take a step to Jesus led to something incredible that we'll get to in a little bit. But that was a private defining moment. Never discount your alone time with the Lord and when you have private defining moments. Despite years of weakness, she had not given up hope. Believing Jesus could help, she left her bed, joined the crowd, and found her answer. Now, what's amazing about this is she wasn't allowed to worship. She wasn't allowed to go in the synagogue. So what I picture is she hears all of this commotion out in the streets. She goes to her window and she hears things like, Jesus is back. The miracle worker has returned. Man, did you hear about when he healed that blind guy? And she's overhearing this and she thinks, okay, if Jesus can do that, I'm gonna stop looking at these physical treatments and I'm finally going to go to this Jesus, this miracle worker, who she has never met, she has never seen, she's never really heard about other than things outside of her window, because she's not allowed to leave and go be around people. So much so that when a doctor comes and sees her, her doctor then has to go and isolate, because now her doctor is now unclean from being in her presence. Sometimes we can feel like this woman. We can feel like we've had some demoralizing days. We can feel like life is a huge annoyance right now. Things are just pestering and poking at us. Things are stealing our joy, stealing our energy. But we can do what she did, and we can take a step towards Jesus. We can personally come to him. Our second point this morning is personally coming to Jesus is the real secret of peace and healing. We must connect with him. Let's talk a little bit more about this woman. She was not just isolated and deemed unclean once a month, but every day for 12 years straight. Quarantined and a threat to anyone in her proximity. For 12 years, she tried and failed to get better, and it only got worse. So in our text in Mark chapter 5, her presence pushing through the crowd, trying to get to Jesus, is completely scandalous. She risks exposing everybody in the crowd. She risks nullifying Jesus' healing powers because of her dirtiness. Her being there is completely unlawful. Her culture and her religion has taught that she is illegal. How dare she leave her house? How dare she join the crowd? How dare she touch people? Why didn't she just stay home? Because leaving her home and getting to Jesus was a defining moment. And sometimes all we need to do is stop looking at these other treatments, these other answers, other ways to fill the void, other ways to help with this burden, and we need to just take that step towards Jesus. Personally coming to Jesus is the real secret of peace and healing. This woman was bold. She was at her wit's end, and so she was willing to risk everything. If I can just touch his clothes or his garment, I will be saved. She feels in her body that her bleeding has stopped. Mark 5:29 says this. Immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of a terrible condition. Everything stops, and this is now her public defining moment. Her leaving her house was her private, making that decision, having the willpower to do that, leads to this public. Everyone is seeing this. Jesus touched her. Jesus picked her up off the ground. Did you see that? Can you believe that? We know who that woman is. It led to a public defining moment that affected everyone around them. When you have a defining moment with the Lord, it can affect the people around you. It can affect your family, your friends, your coworkers. A work and move of God in your life, it can be extremely powerful. Now, have you forgotten about Jairus? We haven't talked about him in a while. He's standing right there for all of this. And can you imagine how Jairus is feeling? Hey, Jesus, my daughter, don't focus on her. She's not even supposed to be here. She's a nobody. She's doing this all wrong. I came to you the right way. Focus on me and my innocent daughter. But Jesus connects with this woman, picks her up, calls her daughter, speaks words of peace and healing and salvation over her. And as she is experiencing her healing and her restoration, the crowd's moving. Here comes a guy running. Jairus, glad I found you. I'm sorry, your daughter's dead. Jesus, if you would not have stopped, you could have made it to my house and my daughter could still be alive right now. Like, can you imagine what is going on in the emotions of Jairus? But Jesus, once again, doesn't say a word. There's no comfort. There's no pastoral words. Jesus just begins to move. He starts walking. He gets to Jairus' house. He busts in the front door. He passed the mourners. And because of Jairus as a religious leader, he would have had professional mourners. And because of his status, they would have been louder and more obnoxious, believe it or not. They were professional criers, mourners, and groaners. And so Jesus kicks everybody out. Will only allow mom, dad, and his 3 closest disciples. He walks in, he touches the little girl's hand and says, little girl, get up. Some text says, little girl, rise up, or daughter, arise. And the Bible tells us that immediately she responds. Immediately the woman was healed. Immediately she responds. Right here in that room is a private, defining moment for mom, dad, and those disciples. The disciples have seen Jesus heal the blind and the lame, cast out demons. Of course he can do that. And now they know he can control nature. But Jesus is now raising the dead. Can you imagine the experience that was for those disciples? And then, get this, she opens the door, she walks out, and she is seen by servants, family, and those mourners. And all those people are now affected by that private, defining moment. When you have defining moments with the Lord, it affects the people around you. But something important is happening here. We like to just read this and then move on and keep going and get to Mark chapter 6 and celebrate how awesome Jesus is. But right here, Jesus is breaking the law. By going and touching a corpse and a woman who is bleeding, he is going against specific purity codes in Jewish law from Leviticus and Numbers. Leviticus 15 says, when a woman has a discharge and the discharge is in her body is blood, she will be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days. And whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. It goes on to say that anything she lies on, sits on, touches is also completely unclean, and you should just stay away for a week. Numbers 5 says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the people of Israel that they put out of the camp everyone who is leprous, has a discharge, or everyone who is unclean through the contact with the dead. You shall put both male and female, putting them outside the camp, and they may not defile their camp in the midst of which I dwell. So, if someone dies and your job is to be a body mover and a body barrier or whatever, like, you then have to go sleep outside the camp. You can't go back home to your wife and your family. You are now isolated and dirty just for doing your job. But you touched a corpse, so you have to go isolate. And the people of Israel did so, verse 4. So Jesus went against the norm to have these defining moments. And Jesus is ready to go against your norm, ready to go against your comfort zones so that you too can have a defining moment with him. Now let's take a look at Jairus and this woman side by side who could not be more different. Jairus is a parent. Her illness likely stopped her from becoming one. He is a man of privilege with name and title given. She's an unnamed, unknown woman, a nobody in our text. He is a religious leader. She is a religious outcast. He is wealthy. She has spent all of her money on failed attempts to get better. He approaches Jesus with a formal request. She just does whatever she wants and doesn't ask permission. But their stories are connected. Their faith connects them. The stories depend on each other. The woman had been suffering for 12 years. That's the entire length of Jairus' daughter's life. She was 12 years old. Both in very different ways express incredible faith. Both fall at Jesus' feet. Both are picked up by Jesus. And they both experience God's salvation and healing through Jesus. They were both unclean, but Jesus blows past those religious rules. Jesus calls them both daughter. Their healing, their salvation, it's not in competition, but it's connected. Their faith connects them. Their stories are connected. And so are ours. Our faith connects us. Jesus' response to faith, personally coming to Jesus, is the real secret of peace and healing. Our stories are connected. I wonder how Mark would write the story today. Perhaps instead of a synagogue leader, it would be a certain level politician. Perhaps a prime minister, a senator, a governor with a sick child who is desperately on his knees praying to the Lord. Instead of a woman who's bleeding, maybe it's a woman with a terminal illness who has spent all of her money on treatments and is just getting worse. And she is in such constant need that the people around her have stopped calling in, have stopped checking in. They don't even want to bother with her anymore because she's such a burden. And now she's completely alone. Mark often wove together events in Jesus' life. Jesus was told about Jairus' daughter, and on the way to see the child, he met the suffering woman. While dealing with her crisis, the message arrived that the girl had died. This account rings with some lifelikeness. How many of us have ever experienced those days where it's just one thing after another just piles on? And it could be starting with little things. You spill something, you stub your toe, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then there's that cherry on top, and you are done. You are just done with the day. Jesus knows what it's like to have days not go super smooth. He gets it when things pile up. He understands those kinds of problems. He is familiar with delays and obstacles. But Jesus was not worried about the obstacle of purity law, but willingly touched the corpse and the woman, which would both render him unclean. But this is very important. This is a very important part of this passage. His compassion outweighed legalism. His compassion outweighed legalism. So many people today have a, God, what have you even done for me lately attitude about life. They don't care about the past. They only focus right now on today. But God never wants us to forget the past. When we face hard times, he wants us to remember the blessings or the defining moments that we have had in our lives. He wants us to trust him to carry us through those hard times. Whether you're a new Christian or have been believing for your entire life, you have reasons to look back and be thankful. You can go to the Bible and read stories like this that are 100% true. This woman, she's over here. This woman was healed, and she was able to then go and reconnect with family, go over to her neighbor's house, start attending worship at the synagogue. This little girl had the rest of her life, and I believe she lived her life to the fullest after that experience. We can hold on to those stories. We can find hope in those stories. We can look back at our parents and our grandparents and our own family and at the small things and the big things where God has shown up. And when we look back and we remember our defining moments or our blessings, and we can be thankful, our faith will grow. Looking back will give us faith for today. Looking at these stories will give us faith for today that God will bring us a brighter future. My last point this morning is remember your defining moments. Our stories are connected, as different as we are, as different as the ways we come to Jesus are, whether with dignity or without, with privilege or without. We all come to Jesus in our desperation. We all fall at his feet. We find God's salvation in him. Jesus looks at our face. He looks at each one of you, and he responds the same way. When you bring your problem, your burden, it might not be a physical healing. It might be a relationship or a finance. But when you bring it to him and you lay it at his feet, just as Jairus fell at his feet and the woman fell at his feet, he looks at you and says, son, daughter, my child, I see this burden. Thank you for bringing it to me. Son, daughter, my child, I've got this. He is ready to handle your problems, whatever it might be. As the worship team comes back up to the stage, we're going to give you a chance to lay things at his feet this morning. I'll have a couple questions and one closing remark. First question is, have you ever wished, I wish God would fix my marriage? Have you ever said, I wish God would intervene at work? I hope today is a better day. I wish God would heal my child. Well, instead of wishing and wishful thinking, when's the last time you brought it to his feet? When's the last time you brought this financial concern, this relationship concern, or this healing concern? We did a healing service in a series a while back, and it was powerful. But have you brought things to Jesus since that Sunday? Do you only wait for Sundays to bring things to his feet? Put your faith in action, because Jesus responds to faith. Personally coming to Jesus is the real secret of peace and healing. Our stories are connected. Remember the defining moments of your life. I'm going to close with this. May we look all around at God's children, at all the world's desperation, all the orthodox and unorthodox ways people are reaching out for help, and recognize that our stories are tied together. May we, like Jesus, speak words of peace and healing over people. May we pray for others, because I don't know if you caught on this, but it wasn't the little girl's faith that healed her, it was the faith of her father. The faith and prayer that you have can affect somebody else. It was his faith that saved her. May we, like Jesus, lift each other up. He lifted up the woman. He lifted up Jairus. He lifted the little girl out of bed. May we too lift each other up. And I'm going to ask all of you to stand with me this morning. Prayer teams are also going to come forward. If you have anything that you would like to pray about, if you have anything else you would like to lay at his feet, as the worship team sings this song, may we all remember to fall at his feet.
The greatness Lord Jesus, you alone are worthy of our worship, our praise, our devotion. You alone are worthy for us to put all of our faith in. We lean our full weight on you today, Lord Jesus. It's you alone. It's you alone. You alone are worthy. You alone are holy like that. We depend on you and you alone. Will you just take this moment right now? Think about those defining moments in your life, the ways that Jesus has touched you, the ways that Jesus has come through in the past. Think about how you need him to come through today, right now, this week. Jesus, it's all about you. We lay before you our needs. We lay before you our pain, our sorrow. We lay before you the difficulty and the darkness. You alone. We put our faith in you alone. It's not about anything that we can do. It's not about anything, any power that we have. It's all about you, Jesus. It's all about you. Friends, as we prepare to go from this place, I encourage you in a couple of ways to put your faith into action. That you would consider joining us this evening for prayer in the lower building. Let's join our faith together. Take some time to talk with Carol in the back of the room. We're going to try to put together a missions trip to be a blessing to that ministry in Kenya next year. Maybe you could be a part of that, to put your faith into action. Maybe for you, putting your faith into action is something really specific this week. And Jesus is speaking to you. What's that step of faith that you can take? And right now I pray God's grace, his favor, his blessing to rest on you, on your home today and this week. If you just would like to stay for a little bit longer, linger in the presence of Jesus, please do. But friends, for those of you who are going to go in God's grace. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.